The NFL is home to the greatest wide receivers in the entire world. So today, let's rank the top 10 wide receivers heading into 2024. Now, before I get into my list, I want to give you guys a bit of an explanation as to how I came up with this list. For starters, I obviously looked at the production of every single wide receiver. And then the second thing, and one of the bigger things for me that differentiates these receivers, because all of these receivers on these lists is fantastic players, but the versatility of the player means a lot to me. And before we get into the list, let me tell you guys a couple honorable mentions. Before honorable mentions, I will be talking about will be DJ Moore, Puka Nacua, Keenan Allen, and Terry McLaurin. We'll start off with Puka Nacua because this one's quite simple. He's only had 1 year of production, so I want to wait at least one more year before I consider him a top 10 receiver. For DJ Moore, I think he's great, but I just don't think he's top 10. There's a lot of good receivers. Maybe you could slide DJ Moore in at number 10, but I just couldn't do so. Same thing applies for both Keenan Allen and Terry McLaurin. All four of these receivers are fantastic players and are easily one of the best players on their respective teams, but the list of top 10 receivers is a very sacred list, and it is so hard to put those guys in. Lastly, if you guys are not subscribed, which is about 92% of you guys, go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button because that means a lot to me. Let's get into the video. Starting off with number 10, we'll be discussing Stefon Diggs of the now Houston Texans. Now, Stefon Diggs throughout his career has sort of been a controversial player at certain points, and I think the controversy really became at a boiling point this last season. Through his relatively long career, he has 9,995 receiving yards and 67 touchdowns, and he has been on a recent streak of 1,000-yard seasons. Ever since 2018, he has consistently gotten basically 100 catches each season outside of 2019, and every single year he has surpassed 1,000 yards. With the Buffalo Bills, he is coming off of his recent worst year, quote unquote, with the Buffalo Bills. He only had 1,183 yards, but he still had a 107 reception year, so it wasn't like he had a bad year by any means. I think it's pretty obvious that Stefon Diggs at this point in his career is starting to enter into the decline area. He's been in the league for almost 10 years at this point, and while he is still an incredible player, you can definitely see that the wheels are somewhat falling off, just not quite yet. I do think Stefon Diggs has another 3 to 4 years of him being at his quote-unquote prime, and I felt like I had to keep him on this list because he's had so many years of success, even more so than any of the players mentioned before, maybe outside of like Keenan Allen, but that's arguable. And I do think Stefon Diggs is a fantastic player. With that being said, is he the number one player on the Houston Texans in that receiving core? I don't know. That's what's going to make that team so much fun. And last little point about Stefon Diggs, I think next year when we do our top 10 wide receivers, I don't think he's going to be on this list because of how good the Houston Texans receiving core truly is. Next up at number 9, we'll be discussing Mike Evans of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, it's crazy to talk about Mike Evans and act as if he has been underrated his entire career, but somehow, some way, he has been considerably underrated his entire career. Ever since 2014, he has not had a single season where he has missed 1,000 receiving yards. He's a very durable player, with his only season really missing a lot of time was in 2019 when he played 13 games, which is pretty crazy to talk about, especially when almost every player misses a lot of time. Mike Evans has stood the test of time, and I still think he is playing at an extremely high level. The only thing that really knocks down Mike Evans is that he is not very versatile. You're not going to put Mike Evans in the slot, whereas you can put a guy like Diggs or some of the guys in the list that I'm going to talk about here in a second. You can put them in the slot. Mike Evans is going to be consistently on the outside, which works out fine for the Buccaneers because they just so happen to have a number of slot receivers like Chris Godwin who play at a high level. Fortunately for Mike Evans, he had the awesome ability to play with Tom Brady for a few years, so he was able to get that championship, and I do think that his legacy is going to last a long time in this league. It's kind of shocking that not every single person has him in their top 10 when he is as productive and proven of a player that you can find in the league. You'll see people in the list who I'm going to talk about here in a little bit who only have maybe 1 or 2 years of successful seasons, whereas Mike Evans has been doing this thing for quite some time. It just so happens that I don't think he's quite of the level of these other guys, but man, he is an awesome player, and I'm just going to be so sad when he does end up retiring. At number 8, let's talk about Brandon Ayuk of the San Francisco 49ers. He is in that list of guys who has sort of broken out the past couple years. In his first 2 years, he had less than 1,000 receiving yards, but in these last 2 years, he has managed to break out and consistently have 1,000 receiving yards plus. And in 2023, he had his best year with 1,300 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. Surprisingly, with that being said, the 49ers have not decided to pay him, which I kind of think is a mistake, but I also understand understand their situation because they have so many good players that need to get paid. But for Brandon Ayuk, he is starting to really form into his own shell where he is truly becoming a true wide receiver 1 in this league. He has a little bit of versatility. Of course, when you play with a guy like Deebo Samuel, the versatility is not really the biggest need for that position, but he does have some of it if they need to use it. He's a big play machine and can do basically everything you want as a true wide receiver 1. It will be interesting to see if he doesn't get signed by the Niners, what his market could potentially look like, whether it's through a trade or through free agency. I think at this point he's becoming a tad bit underrated by Niners fans too, because I've seen a couple Niners fans say they'll be fine without him, which I think is kind of crazy to say. But with that being said, I love Brandon Ayuk. I think he's a great player. I think you can make an argument that Mike Evans and Diggs are better than Ayuk, but as of today, I would have Ayuk over them at this point. Coming in at number 7, we'll be discussing Amon-Ra of the Detroit Lions. In my opinion, one of the more fun stories that we have in the league. Amon-Ra is only 6 foot, and I don't think he is 6 foot. He's probably less than that, and doesn't really weigh a whole lot of pounds. I mean, this is a really below average sized guy who really no one had expectations of him ever being a true wide receiver 1, yet he has carved out a role in this offense and has just played it at such a high level. Amon-Ra is one of those guys who really benefits from his ability to be extremely versatile. You can play him on the outside, you can play him similarly like you could play a Deebo Samuel, you can play him in the slot. He can be used in any way, shape, and form, and that really benefits him because it allows him to do so much more with the ball in his hands. In his rookie season, he managed to have 90 receptions, and since then he has consistently averaged over 100 receptions a season. In 2022, he surpassed his first year with 1,000 receiving yards, and in 2023, he had his biggest breakout year with 1,500 total receiving yards and 10 touchdowns. And at this stage of his career, he has basically become the profile picture of what a consistent offensive weapon looks like. You can consistently rely on him to consistently get 100 receiving yards per game and be everything and more of what the Detroit Lions need him to do. He's a physical run blocker. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty. He's got good hands. He's good deep. He's good in every way, shape, and form. Amon-Ra is such a fun player to talk about, and I'm so excited to see what his future holds. Coming in at number 6, we'll be discussing A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, early on in his career, he was with the Tennessee Titans, where he was a pretty solid player, but didn't quite break out to the level of guy that he has become. But in these past 2 seasons, he has absolutely broken out and turned himself into a top 10 wide receiver. In the last 2 years, he has gotten over 1,400 receiving yards and over 88 receptions. In 2022, he had 11 touchdowns, and in 2023, he had 7 touchdowns. And last year, at a certain point, he was on pace to be one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver of last year, until the Eagles kind of fell apart late in the season, which also kind of hurt A.J. Brown's stats. Had the Eagles played like they did early on last year for the entire season, A.J. Brown very well could have been in my top 5 this year. But I do think that there's 5 players who are potentially better than A.J. Brown. With that being said, the player I'm going to talk about next, if you want to interchange him and A.J. Brown, I don't disagree. I think A.J. Brown is a fantastic receiver. He does lack the versatility, but he does also play next to Devontae Smith, so that doesn't really require him to be much versatile. He's primarily an outside receiver. He's going to make a lot of big time plays. He's good after the catch. Good blocker. He's a really solid receiver. However, at number 5, we'll be discussing Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, like I said, if you do want to end up replacing A.J. Brown and Ja'Marr Chase, if you want to interchange these guys, I am more than okay with that because I think both of these guys are on a very similar level. But I think that Ja'Marr Chase, maybe talent-wise, is a tad bit better. Again, I don't have an issue if you want to change and flip-flop either of these guys. I thought it was a really hard discussion, but I decided to go with the younger player who's a little bit less proven, that I think has a little bit more in the tank in him. Through Ja'Marr Chase's 3 short years, he has put together 268 receptions, 3,717 yards, and 29 touchdowns. His best year was, of course, his rookie year, and last year he actually had a pretty solid year, even despite the injuries. The unfortunate part for Ja'Marr Chase is that he really has not, recently speaking, had a full season of health from Joe Burrow. Last year he dealt with a number of injuries, yet still managed to get 100 receptions on the year. I do expect next year to be another sort of breakout season where he surpasses 1,400 receiving yards and probably over 10 touchdowns. And then I think he'll maybe push the agenda for him to potentially be considered a top 3 receiver yet again. Ja'Marr Chase does have the flexibility to both play inside and outside. Maybe isn't the best with his hands, but there's a number of other guys on this list who have at certain points throughout their career struggled with that. But I do think Ja'Marr Chase is improving every single year despite his production not necessarily being there. I think next year will sort of be a breakout year for him yet again, so I'm quite excited to see what the 2024 version of Ja'Marr Chase looks like. Coming in at number 4, we'll be discussing CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys. CeeDee Lamb to me is the pinnacle of a versatile receiver in the NFL. He can play on the inside, he can play on the outside, he can do everything that you need him to do. He can be your Deebo Samuel, he can be your AJ Brown, or he can be your Tyreek Hill. He's a very versatile player that has so much potential. In his rookie year was his only year where he did not have 1,000 receiving yards, but that was also the year that Dak Prescott got injured, so take that as you will. But since 2021, he has consistently received over 1,000 receiving yards, and in 2022 and 23, he had 100 plus receptions. And in this offseason, the Dallas Cowboys did absolutely nothing to shore up their offense, so I can guarantee you that CeeDee Lamb will be the #1 target and will easily probably surpass 1,500 receiving yards yet again. I think if CeeDee Lamb has another year like he did last year, we're talking about a guy who is easily a top 3 wide receiver and arguably could make a case for being the best receiver in the league. But as of now, I think there's 3 guys who are better than him, 1 older guy and a couple younger guys. I love CeeDee Lamb. I love his game. I think he's going to be in for a massive season. All my fantasy football players, go out there and draft CeeDee Lamb. He's in for a massive season. However, coming in at number 3, we'll be talking about the old man of this list, Davante Adams. Davante Adams has been in the league since 2014 and has been a dominant player basically since like 2016. Obviously, we all know the connection that he and Aaron Rodgers had for all those years, but the past couple years, he has been the guy for the Las Vegas Raiders and has consistently been the best or one of the best receivers throughout the league. Davante Adams may not have the same statistics of a guy like Mike Evans, who I think has been better career-wise than Davante Adams, but I think Davante Adams has been, at his peak, a better receiver pretty consistently than Mike Evans. I only compare the two because they both came out in 2014, and of course, Mike Evans has had 1,000 yards every year, whereas Davante hasn't. It's kind of been more as of late he's been better. What I mean by that is Davante didn't have 1,000 receiving yards until 2018, whereas Mike Evans every single year. But despite that, Davante Adams has been consistently a better receiver ever since 2018, in my opinion. With the Las Vegas Raiders, he has been the guy and has, done everything that this team needs him to do. He doesn't really have the versatility, but he can be. He may not have the versatility of a CeeDee Lamb, but when you talk about playing football and playing the receiver position at an extremely high level, you look at a guy like Davante Adams and you sort of model your game after him. There is a very good reason why every single receiver out there, when they're asked who is in their top 5, they almost immediately talk about Davante Adams. He is a walking teaching tape every single time he runs a route. He is fantastic with the ball in his hands. He's good on the outside, can make plays deep, and is the uber competitive type of player that every single team wants, and I think he's a really good culture fit with this Las Vegas Raiders team. However, coming in at number 2, we'll be discussing Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. I think Tyreek Hill is one of those unique players in this league that you have to make a game plan for to utilize him at a very high level, and for the Miami Dolphins, they have been able to do that at an extremely high level. Tyreek Hill with the Kansas City Chiefs from 2016 to 2021 was a fantastic receiver and one of the best in the leagues, but I don't think anyone really considered him to be an offensive player of the year type of guy, nor a guy who should be warranted a top 5 receiver in the league type of status. But ever since he's joined the Miami Dolphins, he has solidified himself as arguably the best, if not the second or third best receiver in the NFL. In 2023, he had 119 receptions, 1,799 yards, and 13 touchdowns. And in 2022, the year he was acquired by the Dolphins, he put together 119 receptions, 1,710 yards, and 7 touchdowns. And the Tyreek Hill and Tua Tagovailoa connection is arguably the best in the entire NFL. You got to give credit to the head coach of the Dolphins, who has put together game plans to utilize Tyreek Hill's ability. We all know that Tyreek Hill isn't the best when he is pressed up against in the line of scrimmage, but when you give him some space and you let him run, this dude can do everything. He can play on the inside, he can play on the outside, you can use him like a running back, you can do anything you want with him. He's got the speed, may not have the size, but similar to Amon-Ra, he's an ultra competitive guy who can do a bit of everything. But of course, at number 1, we'll be discussing Justin Jefferson of the Minnesota Vikings. Ever since Justin Jefferson has entered the NFL, I think we've all considered him to be a top 10 receiver. And in his career, I think we've all at this point solidified him as arguably the best or second best receiver in the league. Through his short 4-year career, he has 392 receptions, 5,899 yards, and 30 touchdowns. And I think this is sort of an interesting year for Justin Jefferson. This is his first year with no Kirk Cousins as his quarterback. So it'll be very interesting to see if he can build a connection with either JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold so that he can continue his streak of 1,000 yards. You have to imagine that Kevin O'Connell and that coaching staff is planning all sorts of game plans centered around Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So while this team may run the ball a tad bit more with the question marks at quarterback, I can definitely see a guy like Justin Jefferson easily having a massive season. Whenever you have a young or inexperienced quarterback like JJ McCarthy, you always need to have a safety valve, and I do think Justin Jefferson could be that for him. But that is going to conclude my top 10 list. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comment section below, and I would love to hear your guys' list. But if you enjoyed, hit the like and subscribe button, and I love you guys. Peace.